Are you truly ready to race Hyrox? As you approach the start of the event, you're probably questioning yourself. Have you done enough sled work? Have you done enough burpees? Are you going to be able to run fast enough or far enough? Today I'm going to answer all of those questions for you by providing the 3 signs, the 3 red flags that you are actually not ready to race Hyrox. This will help you spot those signs nice and early, prevent them from really truly manifesting themselves, and help you get on the straight and narrow and the path to success as you lead in to the race start. My name is Sam Girling. I'm the founder of Girling Nutrition. I'm a fully qualified nutritionist. I'm an avid Hyroxer myself. And today I'm going to be answering all of these questions for you so that you can go into your Hyrox race with the utmost confidence. So without any further ado, I'm going to grab my trusty laptop here to make sure that I'm staying on track and providing as much value for you all as possible. Starting with point number 1, sign number 1, red flag number 1, which is you've hit a training plateau. Now, this can happen at any point during your training block. There's no sort of specified or likely time for it to occur, but recognizing the signs could really help you pull yourself out of it, okay, and make sure that you're getting back on the path to success and making progress with your training. Okay. The sure sign that you've hit a training plateau, as much as it sounds obvious, is that you just stagnate, okay? You don't see any progress in your lifts anymore. You're struggling to get past a certain point. You don't see any progress in your running splits or how far you can run. And, you know, despite training consistently, these things start to manifest themselves and you're struggling to, you know, really pinpoint what the reason may be or why that may be. I think it's also important to acknowledge here that it's not just a matter of the numbers and the data. It can also be quite subjective. So if you're hitting numbers or you're progressing, but the RPE seems, you know, the rate of perceived exertion, how difficult these movements feel becomes a lot harder, then that's a sign that you may be plateauing. Also, if you're, you know, just feeling a little bit flat around your training, you know, you're not perhaps enjoying it so much, they're all signs that you're sort of, you know, in a plateau or certainly heading towards a plateau. So what can we do to sort of get around this? So the first point is, of course, as I'm sure most of you have heard, the progressive overload principle, which means that we're just slowly but surely adding pieces to the puzzle and progressing week on week, no more than 5 to 10% each week. So that means if you've lifted 50 kg on the bench press one week, you're not going to be lifting any more than 55 kg the following week for the same amount of reps, okay? It's also important with this principle to acknowledge that there are so many different ways to build and progressively overload. So that might be in the form of reps, that might be in the form of sets, that might be in the form of minutes, that might be the form of weight, that could be anything. And it's also important that, you know, we don't necessarily have to progress everything all at once. If we've identified our conditioning or our cardiovascular performance as a barrier to, you know, success with our health and fitness goals, then perhaps we progressively overload more predominantly with our minutes in zone 4 running, for example, and we maintain our strength during that week or during that block, during that mini cycle. Okay, so we don't have to progressively overload everything all at once, because that might be, you know, what's causing the plateau. A touch of overtraining, which is a point that we're going to bring up in just a moment here. And also, you know, ensuring that we're getting sufficient recovery as well is super important with this. So not just, you know, the performance side of things, but ensuring that we're recovering too will help us, you know, show up each and every day and perform at our best. What we want to avoid ultimately, you know, is that overtraining. So just doing too much too soon. Okay, it's always best. If there's one thing that I've learned, you know, training for things like Hyrox, for marathons, for ultra marathons now and half marathons too, is always take the conservative approach. Okay, now there is a time to obviously push ourselves, but in the grand scheme of things, especially across the course of a week, it's best to take the conservative approach. We want to be avoiding things like you know, low energy availability. So when we're talking nutrition, we want to make sure that we're sufficiently fueled at all times, because, you know, this can manifest in things like RED-S, relative energy deficiency in sport, which can actually become a chronic condition that causes you know, all sorts of metabolic and health issues, long-term health issues down the line. So, you know, it might sound like a distant sort of thing not to worry about, but if we don't stay proactive with these sorts of things, make sure we're fueling properly, make sure we're avoiding any overtraining, then, you know, we can ensure that we avoid these sorts of things down the line. Okay, so when I talk about fueling properly, we want to be aiming, if we're competing in Hyrox and these sorts of events and we're pushing our body on the daily, we want to be aiming for at least, I say at least 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now that is at the very, very low end. Depends on how much time you're committing to training, how many sessions you're putting in per week. But ideally, we want to be looking at 4 grams per kilogram of body weight. Okay, again, depending on the intensity of training, if you're training for an Ironman and you're putting in sort of 15 hours to 20 hours of training per week, you might even push that closer to 8, which sounds, you know, excessive, but it's just what the body needs to fuel the performance and enhance the recovery process. So, on a carbohydrate front, 4 to 8 grams per kilogram of body weight at a bare minimum. If you're not touching 2 grams, you're not going to be able to sustain your performance over a period, you know, a prolonged period of time, and you will find yourself entering training plateaus. Okay, from a protein perspective, I've spoken about this a lot, but a minimum of 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight in protein per day. Okay, so 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. Again, that is at the low end of the spectrum. That is a bare minimum that I think everyone should be striving for and hitting, especially if you know, pursuing an athletic endeavor, in endurance especially. If you can get closer to 2 grams per day, you're only going to be benefiting yourself. Okay, a little study that I want to touch on today, which I'm going to be doing a breakdown in future videos. So, you know, this is a point where I'll ask you to sort of like, comment, and hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for these study breakdowns that are coming. But a recent study that I've just read indicated that delaying post-exercise carbohydrate consumption by 3 hours can hinder performance the following day by up to 30%. It also increased the rate of perceived exertion the following day as well. So it just goes to show, the evidence is there to suggest that we need to stay on top of our fueling, both pre, intra, and post exercise. Another good idea to prevent a training plateau is to deload every 4 to 6 weeks. So what does a deload include? It might look like reducing volume or intensity of a week's worth of sessions by around 30%. Okay, so if you're running 20k one week, I've got to do maths quickly on the fly here, you're going to be running around sort of 14k the following week. Just reduce that volume ever so slightly so that you're ready to go again the next week. Okay, it's like taking 1 step backwards, so take 2, 3, 4, 5 steps forward. That's the way to look at, you know, incorporating these deload weeks into your training blocks. And another way to do this is to track the metrics. Okay, so use training logs. So, you know, track your progression over time. Again, tying back in with that progressive overload principle, making sure that we're actually, you know, seeing the progress, but also looking at things like heart rate, rate of perceived exertion, how hard the sessions are feeling, to really monitor true progress, to have something tangible there to make sure that we're not entering these plateaus. Sign number 2 that you're not ready for your Hyrox race is you're under constant fatigue. Now, Hyrox training is intense. Any sort of endurance and training is intense. It's going to come with fatigue. It's natural to feel tired at points, but I'm talking about a different kind of fatigue. If you've felt it, you'll know what I mean. It's this constant fatigue. Even when you feel tired and you actually plan in a rest day or 2, but you come out the back of that rest day and you're still not feeling great. You've had a good night's sleep, but you're still not feeling recovered. This is a sign that you are not ready for your Hyrox race, okay? Your energy is generally low. You're feeling very unmotivated to train. That's a sure sign that you're in this constant fatigue phase. You know, you're irritable in terms of mood. That's another sure sign that, you know, you're entering this phase where you're just, you know, constantly tired, constantly fatigued. So there's 3 main reasons that this will manifest itself. Okay, we've touched on 2 of them already. One being overtraining. Okay, you're pushing yourself too hard. The biggest temptation, especially with Hyrox training, is to think that you need to train hard every day. The competition is hard, the event is tough, the training is hard too. But tapping into these high intensity sessions every day, emulating the Hyrox movements exactly every single day is not going to benefit you, okay? It's the quickest way to enter this chronic sort of constant fatigue. So we need to have a plan in place, make sure that there's some structure to follow. So a recommendation that I have is to follow one quality day, one hard day, with at least one, if not two, easy days. So that's sort of a cycle to follow. One hard day, one easy day. Maybe a rest day, one hard day, one easy day. At least have one easy day in between your hard sessions, and also manage your intensity in these sessions. One thing that I've learned is that when I first started training for Hyrox, sorry, I keep kicking the tripod here. One thing that I've learned with Hyrox training is I used to dump myself into zone 5, sort of VO2 max style training far too often. Now, I rarely ever touch it. If I'm training in a tough session and I notice my heart rate start, creeping over 170 beats per minute, which for me is just above my LT2, my lactate threshold 2 zone, then I back off and I reduce the intensity because I'm trying to manage my intensity. It's a shock to the nervous system, the muscles, the body when we keep tapping into our VO2 max zone 5 areas. Okay, so managing that is super important. But also, another one that I haven't mentioned yet is sleep. Okay, you're probably undersleeping or not getting in the sufficient recovery. Inadequate sleep of less than 7 hours impairs performance, our reaction time, and our that's a bit of a mouthful, our hormonal balance. Okay, there's plenty of studies that I've got here. I'll leave them on screen. This is, something that I found most interesting out of Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep. That's a recommendation. I'll leave it on screen and put a link in the description perhaps. It's well worth a read, because if you want to truly optimize your performance and get the most out of everything that you're doing, aiming for 8 to 9 hours of sleep per night, probably not much more than that, because there can be sort of a point of diminishing returns on that, but aiming for at least 7, optimally 8, if you need it 9 hours per night of quality sleep is so important. There are obviously many ways that we can optimize our sleep. That's not really the purpose of this video for me to do so. If you want to learn all of that, I can make a video, but you can also check out that book, Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. That's where I learned a lot of my sort of knowledge on sleep and optimization around that. But making sure that we're getting sufficient sleep is super important for overcoming this fatigue. Because we don't want to end up, similar to undereating and developing RED-S, that relative energy deficiency in sport. We can also develop overtraining syndrome, OTS, which is, excessive stress and insufficient recovery leads to, this persistent fatigue. So that is, super important to consider. We can also look at fueling around our training sessions to overcome this. Okay, so again, I've already touched on the importance of nutrition, especially carbohydrate and protein intake. But pre, post, and if necessary, if the session is long enough and demands it, intra-workout fueling is going to be so important. I've made extensive videos on exactly how many carbs and exactly how much protein you need to fuel your sessions. If you'd like to check them out, I will leave a link down in the description to those so that you can get a fully, comprehensive breakdown on exactly how many carbs and proteins you need as an individual to fuel your training. I've already mentioned those numbers of, 4 to 8 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbs per day, and 1.6 is the minimum grams per kilogram of body weight in protein per day. But if you'd like some, more extensive breakdown on that, check those links in the description. And then similar to, managing the first sign that we spoke about, which was of course those training plateaus, we can manage this by monitoring the metrics as well. So monitoring our recovery, looking at how much sleep we're getting, tracking our heart rate variability, which is a signal of, how we are able to cope with certain stresses on the body, but also taking in, more subjective measures like how sore do we feel, what are our DOMs like, our delayed onset muscle soreness, how ready do we feel to train, keeping a journal of this sort of stuff. I have loads of journals there behind me, tracking all sorts of different things. I love to write, in case, you haven't already gathered that. But keeping, tabs on these things can be really important, both for objectively and subjectively. So that's another thing to consider. Moving on to sign number 3, which is an elevated heart rate. Now, I'm not just talking about when you push in your training sessions. I'm talking about at all times. Okay, so this is why, again, I'm looping back to that point about tracking metrics and keeping an eye on things. I'm a big sort of proprietor and advocate for, you know, tapping into more subjective feelings and being more intuitive with not only training but nutrition as well. But there is certainly a time and a place for the metrics, because they inform that hard, objective, tangible data that, you know, you can't always get through that subjective analysis. So if your heart rate is sort of 5 to 10 beats per minute higher than normal, not only in your training sessions but at rest as well. So this is where, you know, analysing the health metrics over time. If you've got a Whoop, it's fantastic. I just use Apple Health, but, you know, Google Fit does a fantastic job of this as well. Things like the Garmin app provide this sort of data, but you can actually see the trend lines and how things adjust over time. If subjectively you're feeling like something's not quite right, use the data to inform it. If you notice that your resting heart rate creeps up by 5 to 10 beats per minute, it's a sign that, you know, you're probably entering some sort of, again, training plateau or fatigue, and it's another sign that you're not ready for your next Hyrox race or your upcoming Hyrox race. This is also the case in training. If you know that at a certain, you know, rate of perceived exertion, or, you know how hard a session should feel, and you know where your heart rate should be as a result of that, but you're noticing that the heart rate is actually, again, that 5 to 10 beats per minute higher than it typically is, that's another sign that, you know, you're not in the best of places. Okay, so it's important to distinguish between, I've already mentioned overtraining, OTS, overtraining syndrome, which can have, again, those chronic long-term health implications. But distinguishing between overreaching and overtraining is super important here. So again, I've mentioned that Hyrox training is intense, and there are going to be points where you want to intentionally look at overreaching. This is planned. It causes, you know, a short-term shock to the body, a stressor that then we can adapt from with the right nutrition, with the right sleep, with the right progressive overload principles put in place. It can be planned, and we can sort of recover and adapt from that. But if we're constantly doing this and constantly, again, tapping into those higher heart rate zones, pushing too intensely, then, you know, we're making things a lot harder for ourselves. So, you know, the body starts to fight us, hence why we might see our heart rate creeping up. Okay? Effectively, we just end up in this sort of chronic maladaptation, and, you know, the sympathetic nervous system's going mad. Our fight or flight is taking over. So we get this sympathetic dominance over the parasympathetic. So we're not, you know, getting that rest and digest, hence why the heart rate starts to spike and can't bring itself back down. Okay, so again, tracking things like our resting heart rate on a daily basis, our heart rate variability. There's lots of different ways. If you have a health tracker like a smartwatch or something like that, this is where they can be super useful. Implementing some active recovery here. So again, I've mentioned the hard day followed by an easy day, maybe a second easy day, then a hard day. So making the hard days hard, really prioritizing the quality, and then making the easy days really nice and easy. So active recovery runs, mobility sessions, yoga can really help enhance this process on those easy days. But also making sure that, you know, we're staying on top of things like hydration. You know, dehydration can be a big driver of, you know, any sort of increased heart rate, because you just have to think the body has to work twice as hard if we are dehydrated. So making sure that we're fueling properly with electrolytes, a solid profile of sodium, potassium, magnesium, is going to be vitally important for overcoming this. So it's not just about taking on the right profile of carbohydrates, the right split of carbohydrates and proteins, and obviously healthy fats for things like hormonal balance and recovery, but also hydration too. Okay, so that's another thing to consider there. But they are the 3 points that I wanted to touch on today. So I suppose just to finish with some key takeaways here, is the 3 signs are, of course, 1 being those training plateaus, 2 being the constant fatigue, and 3 being the elevated heart rate. Now, the one thing that they all have in common, the 3 drivers of those signs, are overtraining, underfueling, or undersleeping. They are the 3 big movers, the 3 low-hanging fruit that you can grab and hang on to and make sure that you're not entering, you know, these sort of training plateaus, you know, positions of fatigue an elevated heart rate. If you can keep on top of your nutrition, if you can keep on top of your training and have a, solid sleep routine in place too, you're setting yourself up for that success with your health and fitness goals. Now, having said that, grouping that all together, on the other side of that, we have, one common thing that really wraps it all together, which is essentially a plan. Okay, having a plan in place prevents any sort of decision fatigue for starters. It makes the whole process a whole lot easier, but it helps you keep, consistent with your training. It helps you instill that progressive overload. It helps you stay prepared, create that routine for yourself. So having a plan in place is vitally important. Okay, if you're interested in having that plan in place and having a structured program done for you, then you can check another link in the description down below, which will take you to a page that explains everything that I offer as a coach, exactly what my services entail on the Nutritional Growth Blueprint, which is the name of my service, my program. It's very much tailored towards the endurance athlete or, the everyday athlete looking to get the most out of what they've got. Okay, so, there's some Hyrox bits over there, so you can go and check it out. All the details are revealed. I don't hide anything. The price is included. Everything that you'd want to know is there for you. If you want, to ask any questions off the back of that, you can find my Instagram in a link in the description. So please just go and, ask me any questions that you'd like to know. And again, if there's anything that you've seen today or you've listened to today and you want to know a bit more about, leave those comments in the description down below as well. I'll be sure to get back to you. I'd really appreciate it at this point in the video if you could hit that like button too. It really does help me out, shows that, you're enjoying what I'm putting out there, and hit that subscribe button too, because, I'm bringing free YouTube videos every single week. I've got some educational style content just like this, but also some more vlog style content that, I hope, proves somewhat entertaining, but I hope you learn some stuff from there as well. Stay tuned, because as I say, I'm going to be breaking down that study on post-exercise carbohydrates. That will be my next educational video, so make sure you hit the subscribe button to make sure that you're not missing that one. But other than that, I thank you very much for watching this one. I appreciate it's been a little bit of a long one, so you're a legend if you've made it 22 minutes into this video. But other than that, I'll see you all in the next one on the other side in a bit.